Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Collective Impact Forum, I'd like to welcome you to the Fall 2016 Collective Impact webinar series and today's webinar on moving equity from theory to practice. My name is Robert Albright. I'm an Associate Director with the Collective Impact Forum. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to the webinar today. Really looking forward to today's discussion. All three webinars in our series this fall, including today's webinar on equity, are adapted from sessions from the 2016 Collective Impact convening and were voted on by attendees as what they most wished could be repeated. So we're really looking forward to the discussion today. We have a terrific program for you with a great group of speakers, but before we get started, I wanted to touch on a few items. First, over the course of this webinar series, we'll be talking a lot about collective impact, highlighting initiative stories, and presenting tools and methods for you to use. And we encourage you to sign up for the Collective Impact Forum online, which is a free resource for people and organizations to access tools, training opportunities, and peer networks. And if you haven't already, we encourage you to tab over to the Collective Impact Forum website right now. If you go to collectiveimpactforum.org, you can click on resources. And the third link down there is the link to today's presentation slides and a handout document that we'll be referencing later. You should have also received an email with that link if you're looking for the resources, or if you also want to just click on the box in the lower right that says click here to download your handout, you can access the discussion materials which we'll reference later. The presenters will be walking you through a discussion worksheet, as I mentioned, later in the conversation. So please do, if you haven't yet, you can click on that link now or later in the presentation to download those handouts. Today's program is 90 minutes long, and we encourage you to stay engaged with your presenters by answering polls and asking questions. Periodically, our presenters will ask you a poll like this. The first question here, just to get you warmed up to the poll, is how many people are watching today's webinar at your location? We encourage attendees to organize viewing parties for today's webinar, so we know some of you welcomed multiple attendees from the same location, which is great. So we'll pause for a moment while you select the number of attendees at your location. I already see the results coming through here. We'll take just another moment for folks to fill out. Most of you are there at your desk individually, which is great, but we also have others watching this webinar with groups, which is also great. We'll just take one more moment there. I see most of the results have come through. Perfect. So hopefully that was a pretty easy first trial of the poll, and we'll have a few others throughout the webinar. And then lastly, other than polls, we want to hear your questions and comments. So you can submit them at any time during the presentation via the white box on the right side of your screen. The presenters will verbally respond to as many of those questions as time allows during the Q&A later in the webinar. And we also encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter using #CollectiveImpact. And as you see here on the slide, if you have any technical assistance questions, you can email customer support at Blue Sky eLearn at support@blueskyelearn.com. Lastly, this event's being recorded, and you'll receive a recording link to your email after the conclusion of today's webinar. So with that, I wanted to thank you all for joining, and would like to introduce Ashley Young, Evaluation Associate with Interact for Health. Ashley, it's been a real pleasure working with her, and she's designed this session and did it in Seattle, and so I'll turn it over to her to take it from here. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Robert. Good afternoon, everyone. As Robert said, my name is Ashley Young, Evaluation Associate at Interact for Health, and we are super excited to have everyone on the webinar this evening to hear our presentation, Moving Equity from Theory to Practice. All right, just to go over today, so I'll do a brief overview just in general talking about what is equity, and then we'll hear from our panelists. We have Christopher King, who is a trustee with the Consumer Health Foundation. We have Nancy Csuti from the Colorado Trust, and Jamie Love, a program officer at Interact for Health. Following their presentations, we'll have a review of a discussion guide and then open it up for questions and closing. All right, so what is equity? So here we have two definitions of equity. The first one, providing all people with fair opportunities to attain their full potential to the extent possible. And that's from Common Health Action. And another definition is just and fair inclusion into society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential, unlocking the promise of the nation by unleashing the promises in all of us. And so we have those two definitions, which still for some people is like, well, that really doesn't resonate. Like, what does equity really mean? And so when I think of equity, I think about a track. And when we see the track here, so it looks like they're probably running the 200 meter, which is a straight and a curve. And we see that everyone has a staggered start. And everyone has a staggered start because it would be unfair to start everyone on the same line because they're coming from different distances. And that's really what equity is realizing that people are in different places and they need different things. Another example to think about when talking about equity is to think about shoes. So if we are on an Oprah show, I heard this is a good example. If we're on an Oprah show and we all got shoes, that seems pretty cool, right? But what if they're all a size 7 and we wear a size 9? So we all receive the same thing, but it's not what fits best for us. So that would, us all getting shoes is equality, but us all receiving the right size shoe is equity because we're receiving what we need. All right, and so why does having an equity lens matter? It matters to philanthropy because philanthropy can leverage power and privilege to disrupt the drivers of inequality. Also, philanthropy has the ability to be flexible and make a difference really where equity matters most, whereas some institutions are bounded by funders and are restricted into the things that they can do. The other aspect of why equity matters is that equity values the lived experience, and it's not a top-down approach. It really puts the real people at the center of what's happening. Equity also addresses the power dynamic, so really making sure that you're asking the right questions and really looking at who's making the decisions. Another reason why having an equity lens matter is because when we're looking at data, making sure that we're looking at disaggregated data. So looking at race, gender, sexual orientation, social economic status, and also looking at not only quantitative but qualitative data as well. So when we think about having an equity lens, it's really the application of equity and putting equity into practice. Whereas we think of just equity as something that you value. So the action of equity is having an equity lens. And so now we're going to hear from three organizations that are currently on an equity journey. Some of us are just starting off. Some of us have been on our equity journey for over 10 years now. And so we'll hear from each organization explaining where they are, what their equity journey has been like, and giving us tips as we embark on our equity journey as organization and also in our efforts, in our collective impact efforts or other efforts as well. All right, so next we will hear from Christopher King with the Consumer Health Foundation.
Thank you so much. My name is Christopher King, and it is a pleasure to be on the call today with my esteemed colleagues. And thank you, Robert and Collective Impact Forum, for the great work that you do and your commitment to such a very important topic. I bring a unique perspective as a trustee of the Consumer Health Foundation, and I've been on the board for 7 years, and I am the immediate past chair of the foundation. The Consumer Health Foundation is based in Washington, D.C., and we envision a region and a nation in which everyone has an equal opportunity to live a healthy and dignified life. And by everyone, we mean regardless of race, ethnicity, immigration status, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, age, or income. Now, whether it's within the context of internal operations or how we interface with the communities that we serve, this vision guides everything that we do. So I want to talk a little bit about who we are. It looks like my slides are missing here. We are a regional foundation whose focus is on the achievement of health equity with a focus on low-income communities of color in the Washington, D.C. region. We are a conversion foundation from the disbandment of Group Health Association in 1994. And when the foundation first began its work, its efforts were around increasing access to care. For example, we funded safety net providers. We funded positions such as community health workers because these organizations didn't have revenue streams for these types of positions. We do consider ourselves a learning organization, and I'll talk more about that in just a few. And through a series of events over the years, our community has taught us a lot of lessons that have stimulated a shift from access to care to advocacy and efforts to promote racial equity and economic justice. Because we know and we've learned that this approach will be key to the achievement of the vision that I've shared with you on the prior slide. We fund 25 to 30 organizations a year, and our average grants range from 30 to 50K. So let me take just a moment to talk a little bit about how we interpret, I see how this is working. All right, how we interpret equity in our approach. For so long, society has relied on the healthcare system to eliminate racial disparities in health. However, it's clear that health is mostly shaped by where we live, work, eat, and play. We also know that historically marginalized communities did not happen by coincidence. Instead, it was explicit and implicit forms of institutionalized racism, and many of those systems remain intact today. So our work focuses on addressing those structures and those systems. So we see equity as a goal and a purpose. We published this framework, and I think the link has been sent to you. But to achieve this goal of racial equity, we perceive this work as a process that requires us to fundamentally change how we operate, how we work with our communities, and how we evaluate progress. I'll provide an example of each one in just a moment. But before I do that, I'd like to share a few aha moments that got us to this place. About 15 years ago, we conducted community speak-outs. They were held in various neighborhoods across the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. The purpose was for the foundation to learn more about the barriers that do not allow residents to fully achieve their health potential. And in that, we were able to pick up on 4 overarching themes: lack of cultural and linguistic competency. We were informed about experiences of daily discrimination, poor social conditions, particularly in communities of color, and the lack of access to high-quality education, good-paying jobs, healthy food, and access to affordable housing. These lessons challenged us to totally rethink our grant-making strategy and how we could stimulate change. And in the midst of this process, we had to ask ourselves, do we want to continue to be a safety net organization, helping folks who fall through the cracks? And yes, those types of foundations are important. Or do we want to roll up our sleeves, be bold, go out of our comfort zone, and address root causes of poor health? So this is a question I pose to those of you who are joining us this afternoon. Is your foundation in the safety net space, or are you in a position to take risks and address the historically embedded barriers that must be eliminated in order for people to fully achieve optimal well-being? Needless to say, we chose the more difficult route and committed ourselves to learning. For example, in 2007, the Philanthropic Initiative for Racial Equity and Applied Research, now referred to as Race Forward, they came in and did an assessment of our foundation and how we do our work, and they offered us with some recommendations for how we could be more impactful. One example I can share with you is in our literature, we would use vague terms such as, and we normalize these terms in our culture, such as vulnerable or underserved populations. And through this process, we learned that we needed to be more specific in communicating our target audience. And now we use language, the terminology, low-income communities of color, for example. Now, this slide speaks to how we approach our work, recognizing that racial equity is a process. And I'll highlight that in just a few. But I will say that the activities on this slide would not be possible without a board that sees itself as ever-evolving and bold in an approach to address institutional forms of racism. We fully support and empower our staff at the Consumer Health Foundation to assume leadership on this topic. We are a learning organization, and our board is continuously learning. We have retreats in the community. We carve out time during routine board meetings to hear from the community, and we engage in substantive dialogue. It's also important for us to have a board that is reflective of our community. So we do use a board matrix that stratifies members by race, by age, by gender, sexual orientation, area of expertise, and geographic residence. This commitment is key to having meaningful and informed discussions that we believe are prerequisites for success. I also want to highlight our commitment around vendor diversity. We firmly believe in mission-consistent investing, and we are committed to doing business with like-minded organizations. From catering services to the search firms we use to attract talent, we do business with organizations that are either based in the communities that we are targeting or businesses or organizations that are explicitly committed to diversity and inclusion. Again, we are funding community-based organizations that are doing some heavy lifting in the advocacy space, and one of our most recent accomplishments collectively was to increase the minimum wage for workers in the District of Columbia to $15 an hour, which will impact more than 127,000 workers, the majority of whom are racial minorities. Notice I said collectively because we recognize that we can't do this work alone and we can't take sole responsibility. And that's one of the things that makes this work so complex. It relies us to work in partnerships, work collectively, and rethink how we evaluate impact. I see that I'm getting short on time, so I'm going to go really quickly now. So then, instead of traditional metrics such as the number of people served, we have a unique way of determining and tracking success. Success to us shows up in changes in policies that promote racial equity. It shows up in more language and decision-making around racial equity, particularly among grantee partners in the philanthropic sector. It's manifested in increased investments and the availability of quality services that are necessary to build the infrastructure of low-income communities of color. Success to us shows up in policies and practices across the region that allow residents to have affordable housing in the wake of rapid change and gentrification. As far as advancing the field, I've talked about many of these on this slide, but we do believe in telling our story, hoping it will inspire others. And through a communication strategy that's focused on thought leadership, we aim to heighten awareness and offer recommendations across sectors. Here are a couple of examples. The document on the left was published in the Foundation Review. It provides a deeper insight on how we integrate racial equity in governance, operations, and program strategy. And our most recent publication on the right, which was published in the Journal of the National Medical Association, focuses on health reform and the role of the healthcare system in improving the health of historically marginalized African-American communities. Again, our goal is to help folks understand the manifestations of contemporary forms of institutional racism and how it must be addressed before people can fully achieve optimal health and well-being. Thank you. I'm going to pass it on now to my colleague Nancy with the Colorado Trust.
Thank you, Chris. So I'm Nancy Csuti with the Colorado Trust, and I'm really going to talk about our journey within our organization. And someone had asked in the Q&A about what does an equity journey mean? And I think for us what it means is that this is something that we're committed to for a really long time, in fact, for the rest of our lives, both as an organization, but more importantly, as individual people. And it's something that will go with us no matter where we go. So briefly, we are a health equity foundation, and this vision changed in 2012 to become a health equity foundation. And we started off with listening to the community as well. And one of the things that kept coming up from the community is basically, what do you all know about health equity or about equity at all? So to answer that question, we hired a diversity and inclusion firm, that's D&I, a D&I firm, that's called Visions. The staff interviewed them, and we really liked them. They're a nonprofit firm. They're out of Oakland. And in November 2014, we began this journey. And we've been meeting with them now for 2 years, and we're going to continue through the end of 2016, and then we're going to work with some more local firms instead. But I wanted to talk mostly about some of the accomplishments and lessons learned rather than go into like what the actual work we did with Visions is. They recommended we create a diversity and inclusion team, which we have. It's a cross-departmental team, and they have a very big role. They have a strong role in hiring staff. They reviewed all our hiring policies and procedures, and they made a lot of changes. One of the big changes they made was they researched maternity and family leave policies around the country and really presented a very generous plan that they sold then to our board and to our CEO and our, more importantly, our CFO, because of course it's a paid maternity leave. Grants management and operations is also going, all the staff is going through this, but they're also changing the way they do work to make it sort of more friendly to the communities, and particularly some of the more vulnerable communities we work in. Our language is changing internally, and we have a much bigger role for grantees in our work. Some of the lessons that we've learned in the past 2 years are, and probably the most important one, is that this is a personal journey that we have to go on. We can't just come to work and do health equity and then leave at 5 o'clock. This is something that changes us as individual people. I don't think anyone here realized how our lives would be individually transformed by this. We have to be willing to make changes about ourselves, and if we're not willing, and some people weren't, they left. And it wasn't like they got fired because they didn't do it. They just wanted to move on. They felt like this wasn't something that they really wanted to do. It takes a long time, in fact, forever, and it's definitely uncomfortable at times. I think that it impacts all aspects of someone's life. It requires trust among each other. I think that one of the things that we're learning right now is that diversity and inclusion cannot focus just on race. Up until now, the focus of our work has been on racial equity, and so that diversity and inclusion has been around racial equity. But starting in 2017, we're going to really try to work more around gender equity as well. Some meetings that we've been having recently, issues around transgender and stuff have come up, and we realize we really need a lot of work in that area as well. Visions, the group we work with, they gave us some of these materials to use. Here's one. We have these big posters planted on our walls, and we refer to them all the time when we're in meetings, and all the time when we're in meetings. This one is particularly important for us because we've had organizational development over the years, but it's focused mostly on the cognitive or the behavioral, but never on the affective, the real feelings and emotions that people feel. And Visions has worked with us on all three, but primarily focusing on the emotional side of what equity means and what it means to what race and ethnicity and inclusion mean. And it's, it becomes very personal, and lots of tears are shed by everyone. And so this is just another one of the posters that we have that they gave us this slide. And of course, in the sessions we'd go over this. Our board and staff would go over this before we have a diversity and inclusion meeting. So where we are in next steps is, like I said, we're transitioning away from Visions. What we're looking for is local talent. It turns out there's like 30 or 40 organizations locally in Colorado that we can use. So we're going to use them, and we're going to do more focused things. For example, the one on gender that I mentioned earlier, we have a group here in town that we've been working with on something else, and it turns out that this is one of their expert expertise is to work on the theater of the oppression, particularly around gender. So they're coming in to do some work with us. We have a lot of individual coaching with Vision. So when people have issues that come up around race and ethnicity, or actually around anything, we have one-on-one coaching allowed, and it's very popular. About half the staff use it. And like I said, we're looking beyond race. And new staff get a big diversity and inclusion orientation. The team meets with them. The team tells them what we're doing, and they usually go to a training to kind of try to catch up with us. One of the other things is we've had the same staff be on this team for the last 2 years, and now they're transitioning off because they say they don't want it to be a life sentence. So they're moving on to shifting what other staff want to be on this team. They're not all people of color. I want to make that really clear that we're about half and half people of color, half white, and it's certainly something that is embraced by the team role has been embraced by both people of color and white people, and very successfully, I think. I'm finished. Thank you. And so now I'm going to pass it to Jamie.
Thank you, Nancy. So again, I'm Jamie Love. I'm a program officer with Interact for Health, which is in Cincinnati, Ohio. And similar to Chris and Nancy, we are also a conversion foundation. We've been operating since 1997, and we serve a 20-county region in Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. And our focus is health promotion, health and wellness. And so we have 4 priority areas, which is healthy eating, active living, mental and emotional well-being, and healthy choices about substance use. And we also still do some work in the safety net with our school-based health centers, and then our Empowering Communities program, which is really our community-level, grassroots-focused work. And, as I'm getting started, I just would like to point out, the impetus for creating this session was really around the fact that our 3 organizations are all in very different stages of our equity journey, as we like to call it, which is really just the opportunity for our foundations to look at how we are addressing equity in our work, both internally and externally. And so that journey looks different for each of us, and Interact is the baby of this group. Consumer Health has been at this for a long time, over 10 years, and Colorado Trust has been about 5 years. And so Interact is really just about a year and a half in. And so we come with different perspectives, and I think that that's great because we've had the opportunity to learn from each other, as well as get ideas for how this can work in our own organizations. And so our equity framework really is our approach for how we are doing this. If you see on the chart here, number 1, which is build a common understanding and framework to develop common language and understanding of equity and health promotion, and how that goes across this entire chart. That is our goal, to really have equity be infused throughout everything that we're doing. So this is actually our learning and evaluation framework as we are looking at how we are prioritizing and doing strategic things to move our work forward, and how we can make equity be a part of all of that, so that it is an integral part of the organization and of our work. So when we talk about our equity journey, we really started in June of last year at our annual board and staff retreat, and we actually brought in Unique Redwood, who's the CEO of the Consumer Health Foundation, to come and speak to us, to really tell us about how they had been doing this work for so long and how they were able to make the switch in what they were focusing on. And so that retreat was really great. I think our board was energized by the idea of having an equity focus. And from there, our work continued. So we started by creating an equity committee, which is made up of 7 staff members from across the organization, all different departments, all different levels of positions. We really wanted to make sure we had a gender mix, although we only have 3 men in our office, but we made sure that we did have that sort of mixture in our group. And then we worked to see, what was on the horizon for what Interact needed to do. And so the first thing that the board tasked us with was to develop an equity value statement, which we did, and we actually adapted that from the definition of equity that was developed by PolicyLink. And so creating that value statement and presenting that to the board was our first big win, so to speak, and we've been moving from there. And so we started off, one of the things we had learned from Consumer Health Foundation was the fact that they did learning journeys with their staff, and we really loved that idea. They coined that phrase as opposed to site visits because it makes it so much more powerful about what you're actually doing. We were going on a journey to learn about equity and what was happening. So we've done 2 of those with staff and board members. One was in Los Angeles, October last year. We actually attended the PolicyLink Equity Summit, but before the summit, we had an extra day in town to do a learning journey and visit several organizations around LA and learn what they were doing around equity. And then we took a trip to Atlanta in February of this year to learn from them as well. In addition, we have had some ongoing workshops and trainings for our staff, starting with the equity conference, and then in January of this year, we did an implicit bias workshop, and that was really kind of our first toe in the water with training our entire staff and taking a look at some of these issues. Simultaneously, there is a regional conference that happens here each year geared towards nonprofits called Securing the Future. And one of our staff members was on the planning committee for that and was pushing the idea of having equity be the theme of the conference this year. And so the committee agreed to that, and they went ahead and made that, and we got Amanda Navarro from PolicyLink to come and be the keynote speaker for that conference. And in addition to that, we had Amanda working with our equity delegation. And that is a group of about 25 to 30 people from around the region who attended the conference last year, the Equity Summit, and since that meeting, we have continued to meet as a group and really talk about how to focus equity in our community and in the Cincinnati region and what that looks like moving forward. And so that group had been meeting for about 4 or 5 months when Amanda came, and we really needed some additional technical assistance. So she spent a day with us planning and looking at how we can move a policy agenda forward. And following that, we were able to get Nathaniel Smith from the Partnership for Southern Equity in Atlanta, and he came and worked with that group as well and got us thinking about creating, our vision and mission and aligning goals so that everyone who was a part of that group is actually on the same page and we can be going towards a common agenda as a collective, as well as what's happening in our own organizations. And so now we are to the point that group is entering into a contract with PolicyLink to do some consulting with us for the next year, where we will be working with them to develop an equity profile for the Cincinnati region and really look at how we're able to move forward with becoming an all-in city and developing an equity policy agenda. And so for us at Interact, while all of that was going on regionally, we also were looking at our board matrix and how we can improve recruitment in terms of our board and what's looked at. We had a board member who has joined in our equity committee. We started a book club here for staff to read up on different books and then have staff discussion about those things. And then our biggest hurdle was actually having a full staff workshop, which we were able to do at the end of August. And we had 2 days with our consultants, Common Health Action, who came in and were able to, really do an intensive training, which was the first that our staff had gone through all together as a group. And that really got us to a place where you could see changes in people and what they thought, and really addressed people where they were. So everyone's not always on the same page and everyone doesn't think the same thing, but it allowed everyone to get something out of that training. And so that was a really important step for us moving forward. So our lessons learned in terms of what's been working really well. Talking about equity on a regular basis in our office has proven to work well. It's now become part of the common conversation. There are many people who will bring up thoughts about it. It doesn't only come from the equity committee, and so it's become more of a common language around our office. Having a committee that was dedicated to equity and representing a wide representation of our workforce, I think has been really important because we have this dedicated group who is consistently working on what are the issues that we need to tackle next, what does this look like for our grant making, what does this look like for our organization. Doing the learning journeys, I think was particularly helpful not only for staff but for our board members who attended, and that was a really great way to get some board buy-in and understanding about this issue. The staff training, making sure that we're constantly hearing from experts in the field as well as our colleagues at other foundations has been really helpful. And having the leadership buy-in, this really was started because our CEO said this is something important and we should dig into it a little bit further. And so I'm not sure if he knew what he was getting into when he said that, but now we're here. And so that push has helped for this to become established in our organization. And really having the equity committee, that group has come so far in the year and a half that we have been meeting from where we were before. We have, we talk about it all the time, the fact that the discussions we have in our committee meetings compared to discussions that happen in the rest of the office, we just have really real conversation, and it's the opportunity to get a lot of issues out on the table and figure out how we can address them. And so trying to push that a little bit more in the organization, we also started open forum discussions, which is really just an opportunity that if there's something that anyone wants to talk about, this has ranged from the shootings that were happening this summer to the fact that we just got a new CEO, to debriefing from our equity, diversity, and inclusion training. We've just had sessions where, people will say, meet in the conference room at 1 o'clock. Whoever wants to come can come and talk about this issue. And so we've been doing that, and that has really helped as well. What has not worked, I think, has been balancing between our internal and external work. It's always difficult when people see us doing the internal and talking about, how we can learn, how we can grow, but people want to know, what are we going to do in terms of our outward-facing work, and how is the community going to know that we're doing this? And so we try not to move too slowly, but also making sure that we are doing this in the right way and understanding that you really have to focus on your internal organization before you can do the outward-facing work. So we've really been focused on that, and now are at a point that we're trying to fuse those two together as we are continuing to learn, but also figuring out how that plays into our work. And to be quite honest, having myself and Ashley are two of the folks on the equity committee who happen to be Black, and we were at the beginning the loudest champions in the office for this work, and so sometimes that poses a challenge because then it's seen often as a black-white issue and not something that is larger than that. So when we are the only voices being heard, people would sometimes think that it was a specific agenda that we were trying to push as opposed to this bigger issue. So making sure that we have other folks who are champions for this definitely has helped to improve that. And then really trying to make sure that our leadership is on board because sometimes they didn't always see the value of continuing the staff learning and continuing the internal reflection. It was more about, okay, we've had this training, we know everything, let's go ahead and do it. And it's not quite so easy as to jump out there and do it, especially when it's new to our work and the community knows that this hasn't been our focus. And so we want to make sure that we're genuine and making sure that we can continue in the most authentic way. And so I'll just highlight a couple of tools that we have found helpful. All of these come from Policy Links, so if you go to their website, you can find them. This GEAR tool really helps you to think through the different aspects of your work and what policy can look like, especially in terms of policy changes and systems changes in your work. The National Equity Atlas, which gives a lot of great data down to your community level. And as well as the community engagement ladder, so really starting to look at how you are engaging with the community, if you are working with them or just getting information from them. So, you know, town hall meetings and focus groups, things where you're providing input or they're providing input is very different from, you know, being at that governance level where they're able to make decisions and really have an important voice at the table in the work that you're doing. And to touch on collective impact and equity, we think that it's just really important to make sure that equity is a thread throughout all of your collective impact efforts, and making sure that, you know, this is something that you're thinking about, the authentic community engagement is being done and is embedded in your framework. Making sure that you're using an equity lens in whatever programs that you're putting into place. And so really taking a strong look at systems and policy change, because that is crucial to advancing equity issues. And if your work is just focused on programs, then you're probably missing a big piece of the equity lens. And making sure that you're choosing the right backbone. I think what all three of us have talked about today, although we come from foundations, this is certainly applicable information to any backbone organization, whether you're a funder or another agency. And so making sure that the backbone has a leadership voice and really models the behavior of equity, having the courage and capacity to take on big problems in your community, particularly looking at structural racism, making sure that there is results-based accountability for moving from talk to action and actually starting to put equity into practice, and definitely being flexible because, you know, issues are always changing and community climate is changing, and making sure that you're able to address things as they're coming up. And of course, holding themselves and the collective impact partnerships accountable for actually achieving results and achieving those results in an equitable way, and making sure that equity is a focus of the work. So now I will turn this over to Ashley.
Great. So thank you, Jamie. I think our panelists have done an excellent job of really kind of, you know, sharing with us how they have approached having an equity journey from their organization perspective. And as Jamie mentioned before, you know, it's really a twofold approach. So thinking about what you do internally, and then also thinking about what you do externally as well. And so I think as the panelists were talking, they did a great job of giving us different nuggets of really how are you able to apply this to your collective impact efforts. And before we get into the discussion guide, these are just some things that that the panelists talked about, and that also that can be applicable as we think about like the 5 conditions of collective impact. And so when we think about those conditions, so having a common agenda. So as Jamie mentioned before, really how are you engaging the community and on what level? Are they just at the table just to give advice, or are people really at the decision-making table? When we're thinking about shared measurement system, as people talked about their metrics and really thinking about the board matrix that they came up with, really looking at the data and really disaggregating it so you have a clear picture of the information that you have, and also giving a voice to the information that you are receiving from people. And then mutually reinforcing activities, making sure that you're giving some time and attention to the historical context of the communities that you're engaging with and working with. And also continuous communication. So really making sure that you're using the right tools to communicate with people. If you're using email, that might not be the best method for engaging with a community. You might need a newsletter or something like that. And I really think the backbone support, as Jamie mentioned and all the panelists mentioned, are really things that they have really started to look at as far as like their internal staff, their board, and how they operate. And so I think that using those different nuggets as you look at your collective impact efforts will help shape and make sure that you're having an equity lens. And so we'll move into the discussion guide. And if you didn't get a chance, you can download the discussion guide. You should see a button on there that'll allow you to do that. And if you just want to take a moment, and kind of look at it. So in the beginning part here, we see that we have some definitions. So we have definition of equity, equity lens, and authentic community engagement. And so again, like equity is really thinking about what it is that you value, and having an equity lens is actually the application of it, so putting equity into practice. And then authentic community engagement is really at the core of having an equity lens. So really, again, thinking about that ladder that Jamie discussed. And so here we have some of our discussion questions. So this will be a good time I'll read through the questions, and even if you're in a group of people, to kind of reflect and think about the questions. So where are you and your organization on the equity journey? How would having an equity lens affect your efforts? Who is your biggest champion? Who or what is your biggest barrier? How are you engaging those for whom programs, policies, and practices will affect? And then here are some equity questions to think about. Who's benefiting? Who pays? Who is harmed? Who is leading? And who is deciding? So these are really some good questions that you can think about internally and externally. So as you think about your collective impact efforts, these are some things kind of like as a gut check to think about. And then also if you're thinking about things internally. So I'll give you a few minutes to think about that, and then we'll come back and open it up for your questions that you all have asked. All right. So hopefully you had a chance to talk or kind of think amongst yourself about the discussion guide. So now we'll head into the Q&A. And if you have questions, please type them in, and then we'll ask them to our panelists. So we have a few questions that if we can have Chris answer them. So what kind of measurements do you use to track these new matrix? And how do you know you've achieved your goals?
So that's a really good question, and it's something that we struggled with because our orientation prior to this journey was to focus on number of people impacted, number of services delivered, those traditional metrics. We had to go out of a comfort zone. We had to leave our comfort zone and think more holistically, again, thinking about collective impact, and that we're not in this work alone. And while it would be nice to take full credit for a lot of the work that we're doing, that's just impossible. So we do have a logic model and a theory of change that we use to guide our work. And there's 4 overarching areas that we look at when our grantees actually provide us with their annual reports. We're looking for trends in 4 of these areas. One, we're looking for that we are improving the infrastructure for communities to be advocates for themselves. That's one of the areas that we focus on. The other is that we're seeing the introduction of policies that protect or advance the health of the communities and populations that we're targeting. The other area that we track is around investments in high quality resources in the neighborhoods that we're targeting. For example, can our work be connected to employment or new employers coming into the neighborhoods, or livable wages, as I mentioned earlier, which we were a big part of the minimum wage policy that was just released in the District of Columbia. And then we do a lot around field building because we have this Washington Regional Association of Grant Makers, and these are grant makers who focus on, their areas of focus is around education. Some are healthcare, some are housing, but our goal is to work with the grant makers association to, again, educate them and help them understand how to think about their work through a racial equity lens. So we use the logic model as an overarching framework, and then at the end of the year, we take a look at, we have an amazing staff that has superb skills in evaluation, and they identify trends that can be, that our work can be linked to, and that's how we report success. I think the other question was around the matrix for the board. Sure, I'll be happy to give that to you, but I'll provide a template of that. And just imagine on the x-axis, it has all of the names of your board members. And on the y-axis, it has the different areas that we've identified as important to us, race, age, area of expertise. A few years ago, we decided to include as a board, again, we all decided that sexual orientation was important to us, and we wanted to be sure that we included a measure. We want to include that on the matrix. But I'll be happy to provide a template.
Thank you.
And I guess I can send that to,
Yeah, you can send it to me, and we'll make sure we get it out to folks.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good.
So we have another question. What are the most successful strategies to gain political will in your organizations to participate fully in the equity journey? And so I think, Jamie, if you can start off, and then Nancy, if you can answer that as well.
Sure. So I think that there's been several things that I mentioned that worked really well for us. Definitely, I think having the equity committee, because once you get a group of folks from your organization that really all have, a say in what you're discussing, then you've got that many more people who can go out and talk about it with the rest of staff. And so getting the committee on board and continued learning for us, I think, has been really important. Having that political buy-in from leadership, I think from the beginning, certainly helps to give you a great boost. Now, I don't know how difficult it may be to convince your leadership, if they're not at all interested in equity, to get on board. But I think for us, there was, I'll say, moderate interest. I think the committee may have wanted to go farther faster than the leadership wanted to, and so we did have some struggles in convincing them that we should have the all-staff training, that we really needed to prepare our staff to be focused in this area and have the same understanding. We've had challenges with trying to get our board engaged, although that has been changing, and so our board chair now is interested in moving more towards getting training for the board, whereas before there was a little resistance to that. So some of those things, I think, definitely help to build political will, and it's really about taking those small wins when we get them and continuing to move forward. And so we haven't given up a fight yet. There's been several that we've had to go back and forth on, but I think because the committee was persistent and continued to pursue those things, eventually we were able to, express it in a way that our leadership could understand.
Okay, this is Nancy, and I can say that the way that we got the buy-in is the leader. It came from the top, and it was our CEO who said we were going to do this, and it was not optional. And the first year we spent 8 full days as staff, not all in a row, but we spent 8 full days as a full staff, and then certain teams within the organization met other days as well. It was quite a big financial commitment on his part, and the board said that we were going to do it. And so the people that didn't like it left. I did want to, if I could just answer one other question that was there about the how much authority does the D&I team have? And because our D&I team has a lot of authority, I mean, eventually it works up to the CEO, and he pushed back really hard on the maternity policy, and they kept pushing back to him, and the D&I team got their way. So I think that was a big, huge step for us to see that the staff were able to basically convince him that this is what had to happen. And that was a huge win, not only for the maternity policy, but to give staff the feeling of being empowered. And now they're much more comfortable standing up to him and arguing for whatever the D&I team wants. I think they have quite a bit of authority. But at the end of the day, the CEO makes the rules. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. And I see a question on here. Sometimes collective impact work, power dynamics are a challenge. Who has power typically maps along equity lines. How have you had success managing this? And I'll just touch upon this real quick. I think, one of the success areas is really being transparent about agendas. So I think building that trust and having a relationship where you can come together and say, this is my agenda, and then what is your agenda, and how do we find that common ground? So I think being clear and honest from the start helps to alleviate some of those power dynamics. I think you really see the power dynamics start to rise when the different agendas come into play. So I think from the beginning, to really have an understanding and be transparent about the agendas and calling things out when it seems that some might have a hidden agenda. And I think that helps dispel some of the power dynamics, and also thinking about to the things that we talked about before, thinking about who is at the table as well. And so I think having the right people and having the real people at the table, but actually listening will help with the power dynamics also.
Can I also add, this is Christopher here. I know we said we used the language learning journey, and I just think that's so important because that has been key to us moving the needle in our organization. I mean, we literally, as a board, we had a CEO who was just amazing. This was a few years ago. We left our office and went into a large apartment complex, and we sat down in people's living rooms. And this was a low-income community, and most of the folks there did not speak English as a primary language. And we saw mold and mildew. We saw deplorable living conditions, and we saw how the landlord totally wrote off these folks and totally didn't take responsibility as a landlord. And so there are all types of health issues in this particular complex. That experience alone deepened our conversations as a board. And we went back to the table and said, hey, we need to rethink who's on our board. Do we have the right folks on our board to have deep and meaningful dialogue? And so, and I guess I'm a little biased because I am a trustee. I believe that is key to moving the needle, making sure that you have the right mix of folks on the board, because when you have diversity on the board, folks who are passionate about the issues, it changes the conversations and it changes the approach to how you do your work.
Thank you, Chris, so much. That was really good insight. And so we have another question. Can you speak more about the problems you encounter in institutionalizing equity into processes and strategies? So Jamie, you want to start?
Sure. I think that is something we're definitely in the midst of right now. So we actually started this year off as being a strategic learning year for our organization, which was really an opportunity for us to take a look back at our past few years of grant making, see what the lessons learned were, and then to develop ideas for what we would do moving forward. And so as part of that, we wanted equity to be a main focus and figure out how we can start to institutionalize it into our processes and strategies. And so the first thing really was to institute it into our learning process. And so everything that we've done this year, there has been segments when we are talking about what we have done or what we've been doing, where staff is addressing, what does that look like in terms of equity. So in the past work, was it addressed at all? In the future work, how is it going to be addressed? And really making sure that we are putting an intentional focus on that. And now it's really come to the point that this is a big focus of our equity committee is looking at, how do we institutionalize this into our practices across the organization. So as we start to look at revising our grant applications, what does that look like? What is it going to look like to have an equity focus as we are doing the grant making, as well as within our priority areas? What is that equity focus that we can do when we're looking at our board matrix, when we're looking at our hiring policies and practices and the rest of our HR policies? How can we start to review those things and make changes in terms of equity issues? And so where we sort of landed at this point is that we will probably have some work groups that involve other members of the staff who aren't on the committee to take these things into chunks. So as we're looking at HR, as we're looking at our vendor policies, as we're looking at our grant making strategies, we can have those work groups start to work through those things and figure out, how we can adapt them to have an equity focus and what that looks like in terms of how we're operationalizing it. So it will be an ongoing process for us, but I think it will be important to really infuse that into our work, because then that's going to, in turn, seep out into our external facing work as well and how we're interacting with grantees. And so we're also looking at, providing possible trainings and technical assistance to the organizations that we're working with, so that if they aren't focusing on equity, they can at least have an understanding and be on the same page as where we are as an organization in terms of what we've been learning.
Anyone else want to address that from the panel? Okay. Another question is, can speakers give an example of how their organizations change both hiring practices and grant management practices? Nancy, could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the hiring practices, so we have the person, like if I wanted to hire a staff person, I have my job announcement gets reviewed by the hiring team to make sure there's nothing in there that might be excluding people, and also the questions that we would ask in the interviews. And there's at least one representative from the hiring or from the D&I team that's on the hiring committee. And the questions are quite different. One that I just hired somebody recently, and one of the questions, instead of, tell me about yourself, the question is, tell me about your self culturally and how you identify in the world and how that's impacted your work. And, that's like people don't answer that right off the top of their head, and that's the kind of question. So they have a different lens to the types of questions. They don't have the final say on the person that gets hired. The boss, the supervisor would, but they still have, a big role in that. The grants management has been a little different, and some of those changes are that we're working in very impoverished communities where they've had bad experiences with funders if they've ever gotten a grant in the first place. And so we're trying to do things like make things less computer dependent. Some of the communities, they don't have access to computers, and it's hard for them to fill out a lot of online stuff. And I've done some progress reports where I've actually just called the grantee and talked to them on the phone and then wrote the progress report because they couldn't do it themselves. And so those are just some things that we do around, that to bring a little bit of an equity lens to our work.
Thank you. And Nancy, can you tell us how large your organization is?
Sure, we have 27 staff.
And Chris and Jamie, how large are your organizations?
We have 28 staff.
So we're a small foundation. We have 5 full-time staff.
Okay, great. And so we have another question too around, in addition to implicit bias trainings, are there other cultural competence and workforce development processes, workshops that you could recommend to truly institutionalize health equity?
Well, this is Nancy, and I don't know right off the top of my head any. I can put them up on the resource thing later. But we've found that our grantees have been asking to do trainings around racial equity, and some of the staff tag on to those, and they love them. So now we're bringing them to the full staff. One of them is called Race Forward. Another one is called Facing Racism. I don't know who puts them on. I haven't actually taken one yet. I'm scheduled for the November one. But I think things that are around race seem to be what people really like to do in our organization. They find them the most impactful.
And this is Jamie speaking for us. So we haven't offered anything specifically to other organizations yet, but that is on our agenda of something that we would like to do. We offer capacity building workshops to our grantees and other nonprofits around a variety of topics. And so we plan to have equity be one of those topics that has an ongoing focus throughout our workshops. And while I don't have a specific training in mind to recommend, I do think that it's a great idea to have something. I think, starting with some type of workshop and then being able to continue conversations from there really just helps to open up dialogue and to help organizations start to think more broadly about how this is affecting their work. And one of the things that we are considering, our consultants that we've been working with, Common Health Action, their equity, diversity, and inclusion training, which is what our staff went through on our 2-day training, they have developed a train the trainer model, and we are exploring that as a possibility for them to do that here and actually get some folks trained so that on a regular basis we can offer that to grantees and to other organizations who have an interest, and then be able to continue offering that workshop without always having to bring the consultants in to do that.
And this is Christopher here. So Race Forward, I think, Nancy, you mentioned their work. The Kirwan Institute, for those who may be interested in advancing the knowledge around implicit bias, that's a great resource. Another resource that we found very resourceful, if you will, is the work that's being done in Portland around the health impact assessment. It's a racial equity work looking at the city of Portland. So again, if you just Google that, you can pull up their document. It's really impressive work.
Okay, so we have another question. So the person says, we do a lot of work with community partnerships more than organizations. How would you advise these kinds of groups in getting started in moving equity from theory to practice? Nancy, could you start us off?
Sure. So we do about half of our work in community partnerships, and the other half are funding nonprofits. And I have to say we're a little early, not early in time, but early in how far we've gotten with the community partnerships. They're actually not on the equity journey, I would say, right now. They're mostly trying to figure out, like, how do they operate, because the money's not going to a nonprofit. It's going to a fiscal agency that then gives it to community members to do these community projects. The goal of the projects is health equity, so they have to have an equity lens. But some of them, they still don't know what that means. So I could say that we're not really at a stage where I could say, that we're successful. We're trying to get the community to just understand what a grant is, because some of them have never, they're just normal people. They're not nonprofits. So I can't really answer that. I'll let you know in a year, hopefully. We've been doing this now for 2 years, and we still are in such early stages. It takes a really long time to do community work, we're finding out. Thanks.
All right. So we have another question. Is anyone doing work to build a capacity of organizations that are led by people of color?
Yes, it's Christopher here. Absolutely. This actually goes back to one of the questions that someone asked around our grant-making strategy. It's really important to us that we are investing locally and that we are working with organizations that are based in the communities that we're targeting. We know that many of these organizations struggle and really rely on our support, but we rely on their expertise as community-based experts. And so that partnership is absolutely key. We refer to our grantees as partners, and together our staff, with the staff of these organizations, sit down and, together they come up with plans that will hopefully help improve the health of these populations in the communities that we're targeting. So yes, we do work very closely with organizations that are very diverse. We include that as a question in our grant application. We do want to learn about each applicant's capacity around health equity. We assess their knowledge in the grant application. It's not a requirement that they perform well, but it's just something that we look for. And organizations know the types of work that we do, so they come to us with a lot of the experience that they know we require in the organizations that we fund.
All right, thank you, Chris. So we have another question. How did each of you prioritize where you started? So if we can start with Jamie answering.
Sure. I think for us, we really took into account what we had learned from Consumer Health and other foundations that we have been talking with, which was the importance of doing the work internally first, so that, we wouldn't just jump out into the community with them, kind of looking at us like, what are you doing? This isn't your expertise. So we really wanted to make sure that we did prioritize our internal learnings, making changes internally, really figuring out how to make equity of value and an operation of how we function on a regular basis. And so it's taken us a year to get to this place, and I think that we've done really great work to get here. And now, while there's still more internal work to be done, we are looking at how to stage that out into the community as well. So for us, I think our first order of action is really going to be looking at our grant making. So before we release another RFP, we really want to revise our processes and make sure that we are on par with what we're saying. And so we will continue to look at that, as well as other strategies and other processes as we continue to learn internally.
This is Nancy. I would say that we started out by having a series of speaker series for the community around health equity and the social determinants of health. The different speakers who were experts came and talked about different social determinants. And one of them was John Powell from Berkeley and the Haas Institute, and he totally flipped our organization on its head. He talked about the role of race and racism in health equity, and I think that when we heard his talk, we knew that that was where we had to start. Even though we'd already started, we knew we had to kind of go back to step one, and we were completely influenced by him and his speech, and he has numerous YouTube videos. If you get a chance, check one out because he's an extremely powerful speaker.
Yes, he is, and that was a milestone moment for us, as well as David Williams from Harvard University, whose expertise is around race and socioeconomic status and its impact on health. So he, too, delivers this content masterfully and helps folks understand the connection there. Someone asked the question around internal policies and external policies and practices, and yes, we started internally first. We wanted to be sure that as a board and as a staff that we were using the same language and we understood, when someone says health equity, what does that mean? We wanted to be consistent before we push that out into the community and push that out in our grant application. So absolutely, we started internally first, and once we felt comfortable as a board, as a staff, and again, it wasn't easy. It was it took us some time to get there. It took us a couple of years because we're talking about issues that aren't the easiest issues to talk about, and the folks come with different perspectives, and when we knew we were uncomfortable, that's when we knew we were making progress. And so let that be a sign. If you're engaging in conversations and folks are feeling a little uncomfortable, that's a sign of progress. And we had to learn to understand that, accept that, process that, receive it. That's key.
Okay, thank you. So we have our final question. So it says, we can't really just do equity work at work and leave it there. How have you handled the line between our roles as professionals and our roles as citizen actors? If I could have everyone answer that.
Sure, I'll go. I think, first of all, you hit the nail on the head in the fact that we do live this. And that's one of the things that we have learned is that you don't do equity, you live equity. And so once you are in this work, it's something that becomes part of everything that you do. And I think for us as an organization, it certainly has been something where we encourage our staff to go out and participate in other things outside of work that's going to educate them, enlighten them, expose them, whatever that is, or support other organizations. And so that's something that is encouraged here, but it's, we understand the fact that, this spreads into every aspect of your life once you really start to look at this work and what equity means to you personally.
Nancy?
I'm sorry, I got it kind of disconnected there. Okay. I didn't hear the question. I was typing and then the question, I didn't hear it.
It says we really can't just do equity work at work and leave it there. How have you handled the line between our roles as professionals and our roles as citizen actors?
Oh, well, I think every day we remind ourselves that this is really important work that takes place 24/7. And I just think as a white person that it's really important for me to speak up about it and not just leave it to the people of color. And I'd say that that's one of the biggest learnings for me personally. And I'd like to speak for, at least most of the other white staff is that, we have a stake in this too. And we can't just sit back and let, Black people do Black Lives Matter. We all have to be part of that. And it just has to happen that way, or we're just not going to achieve any of the goals any of our foundations have. And I really believe that. I think that I try to live it every day, and I'd say our whole organization encourages that.
So for us at Consumer Health Foundation, we don't see a line. I mean, it's literally, we bring our personal, because we're so diverse. We have such a unique group of folks on our board and on our staff that bring their own personal narratives that really help shape our conversations. It's so funny because at some of our board meetings, we talk about these meetings being therapeutic for us, just as people who are in our walking this earth, right? And it's a place that we can come and where it's a safe zone, and we learn from each other, and we take our personal narratives and use that to inform our approach and how we do our work. But again, this can only come from diversity. I really believe in the power of diversity. And if we want to be a world-class anything, we have to have people who are diverse. So,
thank you, guys. So we have one final question before we close out. And so each panelist, you'll have about 30 seconds to answer this. So what are the implications if we don't focus on equity? We can start with Jamie.
Sure. I would say that our work really is not complete. As a health foundation, if we really want to improve the health of people in our community, you have to focus on equity, because there are so many issues that affect a person's health that really are determined by inequities in our environment, in our society. And so without doing that work and without focusing on equity, we're never going to achieve the results that we're hoping for.
I'm happy to go next if Nancy is pulling her thoughts together. I think that if we don't do anything about this, we really don't, roll up our sleeves and be bold, go out of our comfort zone, we will continue to see the social ills that we're seeing in communities across the nation. We will continue to see poor health outcomes. And ultimately, this will impact our ability to be competitive in a global marketplace. So it's serious work. It needs to be addressed, and I think it'll be key to resolving a lot of the issues that we're seeing across the nation.
I wish that I had Christopher's answer, because I think that's a great answer, and I hadn't thought of it as in terms of such a global response. That's a great way to think about it. For us, we just think about it that we can't achieve our mission in Colorado. We can't be a state that we're proud to live in unless we do this. And we come to work every day, knowing that we're going to have to feel uncomfortable, and it's scary, but we can't, be a foundation and say that we're achieving health equity if we don't.
Great. So I just want to thank our panelists. I think they gave us a good overview of their equity journey and different nuggets that we can take away and bring back to our organization and our collective impact efforts. I would encourage us all to be bold, take risks, be flexible, ask questions, get uncomfortable, and trust the process. Being on an equity journey is not a box that you check off. It's a commitment that you make as an organization and a personal investment as well. And so our contact information is here, so please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have additional questions. Some of the resources that you all asked for, we'll make sure that we get those to you. And I will hand it off to Robert for some final thoughts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. I just wanted to thank you again, and also Christopher, Nancy, and Jamie for your time today. It was such an excellent discussion, and I'm so glad we were able to get through so many questions, too. So thanks to all of you who posed questions. We really appreciate everyone joining us today for the first in our fall webinar series, today's webinar on moving equity from theory to practice. I also wanted to make sure you had on your calendar, many of you are already registered for these other two webinars coming up. These were also by popular demand from our meeting in Seattle back in June at our Collective Impact meeting. So the what, why, and how of building capacity for collective impact on November 1st and webinar on continuous learning on November 29th. So please join us for those 2 upcoming webinars. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that you can find today's PowerPoint slides and handouts on the collectiveimpactforum.org website. They'll be posted there shortly, and you'll also receive an email with those direct links soon. And please do, if you haven't yet, join the Collective Impact Forum online. It's free, and you can access even more information, materials, and networks around collective impact. So lastly, please take a quick moment to complete the evaluation that will appear on your screen. And thanks again for joining us today. We really appreciate it and look forward to continuing the conversation. Have a great day, everyone.